Chapter 23. Kamikaze Pilot. After a 10-hour flight, the Rosedales landed at Tokyo Haneda International Airport and transferred to a smaller plane bound for Ellie's hometown of Okayama. Brad enjoyed the formality and ever-present orderliness in Japan. Men strode confidently in black or pinstripe suits, their shiny black shoes splayed out. Ladies proceeded purposely in skirts and boots, clutching designer handbags. The floors were free of debris, the walls absent of graffiti. Everything was, if not new, clean or shiny. After 4 years of marriage, it wasn't his first trip to Japan, yet he still felt like he was entering a parallel universe. It was the opposite of his upbringing in LA and the constant family chaos he'd worked so hard to escape. Ellie's father, Ota-san, picked them up at the Okayama airport in his Toyota Corolla, boasting in his sonorous voice that he had passed the annual driving test required of citizens over the age of 70. Around the parking lot, decorated by a koi pond with an ornate footbridge purely for show, gardens and sculpted trees flourished. Brad was struck by the view and had Ota-san snap pictures of Ellie and himself standing on the little bridge holding hands. On the drive, Brad engaged his father-in-law with the few words of Japanese he could muster. The old man ran a stop sign. Ellie burst out in rapid Japanese, and Ota-san shot back angrily, forcing her into silence. As they drove to the Yamashita house, Brad watched the countryside and wondered why there were no houses on the numerous hillsides that skirt the volcanic mountains that make up much of Japan. Ellie, tell Ota-san that in America we pay a premium for houses on hills because they have a great view. Ask him why Japanese people don't build houses on the hills. It was a good way to break the awkward silence that had settled over them. She translated. Ota-san's voice boomed with confidence, as if he were an engineering expert.
Ota-san says it costs too much and that it's not stable on the hills because they have a lot of rain.
Tell him that in America we have engineers that stabilize the ground so we can build communities and towns on mountainsides, and that people pay a lot of money to be able to see the ocean or the valley from their home in the hills. The old man didn't like being challenged. He believed it must be easier building houses on the hills in America because it rained less. On his home turf, Ota-san was the king. He enjoyed bossing people around, sharing stories, and rebutting any opinion. At least once, he had Ellie in tears. Brad could not understand the man's fierce Japanese and would ask Ellie to break it down. On the third day of their trip, as they were getting over the jet lag, he tried to win the old man over with his own story. And that was a sorry mistake. Through Ellie's translation, Brad told Ota-san about his childhood and how he had tried to help his family. He covered his father's alcoholism, their poverty, and how at 16 he had left his family to work his way through school and become a successful doctor. Ellie hesitated several times, but Brad wanted to impress the old man and push her to continue translating. Ota-san listened patiently until the end of the story, his eyes focused, his jaw set. When Brad concluded, all he got in return was a cold stare as Ellie leaned forward with her head bowed, eyes fixed on the table. Ota-san brought his hands up from his sides, placing them palm down and widely apart on the hard wooden table, assuming command. Finally he spoke. So, dasuka. His voice was an angry growl that made Brad lean back and away from his father-in-law. The senior went into a long tirade like a Japanese general in a war movie, until Ellie finally stood up, took Brad's arm, and pulled him out of the kitchen. She led him down the hall and into a tatami room and closed and locked the door. She was holding back tears.
He is saying that you are a terrible person for leaving your family. He told a story about how his father, too, was an alcoholic and spent all the money he earned on drinking, and the family was poor and only survived because they grew the rice and vegetables. Americans were bombing Tokyo, and Ota-san went to the recruiting office and filled out the paper to get assigned as a kamikaze pilot, which will give his family money when he died. But he was only 14, too young for the military. And he was rejected. So he got 2 jobs and went to night school to help his family and made sure his younger brothers and sister were taken care of and could go to school. He never left his family, and everyone is okay now, and they have homes and their own families, all because he stayed and helped them. He says that you are...
She broke off and could no longer hold back her tears. She caught her breath between sobs, her chest heaving.
I had to hear his story many times. He is so proud of himself. Now he uses it to attack you. He says you are a traitor to your family, and you only cared about yourself.
Something inside of Brad shut down, right then and there, in the Yamashita house, where a family drama had played out many decades ago. A family with children victimized by an alcoholic father not unlike his own. He sat on the tatami mat and tried to make sense of it, but a rational thought would not take hold. Ochi-san is right, he thought. Oh God, the horror. Failure and self-hate welled up inside of him. He had deserted his family when they most needed him. The damage he had caused, he could see it every time they got together. The drinking, the conflicts, the self-abuse. How could he have thought, for all of these years, that he had done the right thing? Feeling empty and sick, he slumped and rolled into a ball on the tatami mat. Ellie pulled a blanket over him, pushed a small pillow under his cheek, and left him there. Then she put on a sweater and went out for a long walk in the cool evening air around the homes and rice fields of her hometown. Her love for both men was deep and unrelenting, but now she felt lost, and that made her wonder if there was any meaning or purpose to her life. The following day, things were normal again. Like few other cultures, the Japanese have a way of shaking off adversity and pushing through as if nothing happened. They gathered at a seafood restaurant with an aunt, uncle, and cousins and talked about world affairs. They enjoyed each other's company. The older ones spoke about what Okayama had been like before the arrival of the bullet train they called the Shinkansen, and before the construction of the international airport. Brad ordered a large hot sake and ate heartily, sitting away from the old man. He made no effort to push his brain to engage in their language. As he savored delicate strands of fresh crab from the nearby ocean, plied himself with sake, and studied the ornate Zen garden just outside the restaurant window, the Yamashitas discussed plans to attend a Buddhist ritual fire ceremony that would be held across town the next day. With the talk of Buddhist priests and temples, Ellie was struck by inspiration, one she hoped could get Brad over his inner torment and leave any damage done by Ota-san far behind. She opened her PC and searched for the Shingon Buddhist temple she knew of in a southern prefecture. The naked monk, holding nothing but a plastic bucket, stepped into the pond at the foot of the tinkling waterfall. Gasping from the shock of the cold midwinter water, he waded in and sat on the sandy bottom, immersing himself to chest level. Using the bucket to scoop water onto his face and shoulders, he went into a frenzy and began shouting, "Ka ji sai bo sa hyo! Ka ji sai bo san hyo! Jin hanya ha ra mi ta ji! Kan ji zai bo sa hyo! Jin hanya ha ra mi ta ji! Kan ji zai bo sa hyo! Jin hanya ha ra mi ta ji!" The rush of splashing water and the monk's painful wailing echoed across the mountainside, yet no one was there to hear it. The chant was over in a minute, long enough for the monk's core body temperature to drop. He stood and waded out of the pool, where he toweled off and donned his robe. Then he began his climb back up the Shingon Buddhist temple, where he served the master who had promised enlightenment in exchange for his obedience and service. It was a ritual he had faithfully repeated every night for years, hoping that one day, Master's promise would be delivered. The temple received Ellie Yamashita's call that day and scheduled a 2-week visit for her and her American husband, who she said needed spiritual lessons.